I want you to imagine that you are Moses. At 80 years old, you went into the land of Egypt to bring the Israelites out of slavery. You lead them into the wilderness, and very soon after getting out of Egypt and going into that wilderness to begin making your way towards Canaan, very soon after you leave, the people begin to complain. We have no water. There's no food. It's terrible out here. Where's my SPF 40? Everybody's complaining. And eventually, that complaining leads to unfaithfulness. It leads to a lack of trust in God. When the spies were sent into the land, 10 of them said, "We cannot take the land." They convinced the entire nation that this was a bad idea. And so the people refused to believe in God and to obey God. And because of that, they have to wander aimlessly in that wilderness for 40 years, again dealing with the barrenness of the wilderness, the heat of the day, not having water, not having food as accessible as it was in the land of Egypt. Yes, God was providing the things that they needed, but their diet was pretty, well, let's say it wasn't varied. So, a whole generation of people has to die off. A new generation has to come along. And you, as Moses, have been there every step of this journey. You've endured all the complaining. You've seen all of the people dying in the wilderness. And now you yourself are unable to go into that promised land. You are allowed to go up to the top of Pisgah or Nebo and survey to look down into the land, but you're not allowed to step foot into the land. But God has one final task for you. Before you die, God has one final task, and He says, I need you to speak to this nation of people and prepare them to go into the land. Now, after 40 years of wandering and suffering and frustration, I'm going to ask a question, but answer it in your mind, okay? What kinds of things would you say as you are about to die and part from this nation? What would you say to prepare them to go into the land? If this was the last thing, the last message you could ever give to these people, what are the kinds of things that you would say? And again, just answer in your head for a moment. But whatever answers you're giving right now, well, I think I would say this, and I would encourage them to do that, and I would be sure to remind them of this. Whatever things you're saying in your head right now are things that you'll find in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a series of sermons, a series of speeches that Moses gives to this nation before he dies and before they make their way into the promised land. This is his last push for their spiritual life and for their faithfulness to God. So, as you read through Deuteronomy, you will notice it reads like a sermon, because that's what it is. It is an oratorical speech that Moses gives to the people. Okay? It's also a very skilled and very high-level form of speaking. Okay? I know Moses said I'm not a good speaker. Yeah, right. Deuteronomy is some powerful preaching. Very good preaching given by this man who said he couldn't speak well. Okay, so I've put the question into your mind. What kinds of things would you say to these people? Now I want to hear your answers. What are the kinds of things that you would say if you were Moses? God will be with you, and he will make sure that you have leaders who will lead you in the right way. Okay? Good. All right. Lydia and then Corey. Don't mess it up. Okay. I think I'm tracking with you. Okay. Yes, we would probably say something like that. Corey?
I would say, love God, trust God, and keep the law.
Okay. Love God, trust God, and keep the law of God. Okay. You're going to hear a lot of that in Deuteronomy. Wayne?
Yeah, I think I might tell them that you are where you are today because your fathers and mothers feared man more than they feared God.
Okay.
And for that reason, they suffered in the wilderness the last 40 years. But if you will now turn to serve God and obey God as your distant forefathers did, you will be successful.
Good. Excellent. What else? Dad? Remember the things that God has done and remember his promises. That one I think is especially worth noting because remember, most of the people that Moses is preaching to in Deuteronomy are people who did not see the things that God did in the land of Egypt. Most of these people, this new generation that's come along, they were born in the wilderness. So this is an entirely new crop of Israelites. And so you're going to see Moses say a lot in Deuteronomy. Remember, the Lord your God did such and such when you were in the land of Egypt. Remember how the Lord your God took care of you when you were in the wilderness. A lot of these people that Moses is preaching to did not see the things that Moses reminds them of. But these would have been stories that they heard when they were young. Their parents would have told them about things like Passover and the blood on the doorpost and what that meant and the 10 plagues and all of that. A lot of these people were born in the wilderness and they didn't live through that. So they needed to learn about those things. Todd?
My first thought was just, it's time for you to get it together because your fathers before you really did not.
Okay. So, think about this idea. I'm not going to call their names. But we have a couple of men, former gospel preachers, retired preachers. They're not in here, but you know who I'm talking about. I want you to take a man who's in that situation. Somebody who's been preaching all their lives, and let's say that they're 95 years old, and they muster the physical strength to preach one last sermon, right? Now, if you talk to these two guys, they'll say, yeah, I've given that one last sermon probably, 15 times. But, okay, but this really is the last one, and they know it. Physically, they just can't do it anymore. So this hypothetical 95-year-old preacher out there who's going to muster up this strength to preach one last sermon, what do you think he's going to preach on? Just give me some ideas. What do you think he's probably going to talk about? Is he going to get up and talk about, the proper application of Revelation 20? No, I don't think so. What's he going to talk about? The most important thing that he can think of. Okay, but what is that? I mean, there's multiple answers. How to be saved, right? A good old time-worn good lesson, just simple lesson, something like that. Let me just preach the gospel in its simplicity. Okay, what else? Joe?
I would say faithfulness and focus.
Faithfulness to God, faithfulness to the Scripture, focus on the right things. Yeah. Oh, okay. You're around it. You're right on it. These are the kinds of topics these are the most important subjects, right? And that's usually what preachers in that situation are going to talk about. And that's exactly what Moses talks about in this book. Be true to God. Follow His word. Don't lose faith like your fathers did. Those kinds of subjects are all over Deuteronomy.
Were the people not acquainted with the idea of asking for something instead of complaining about things? I know they had to go through the Levites and through Moses and stuff, but today we would say,
Help me follow your question.
we have a problem, we ask God for
Okay, right.
for help.
Right.
They just complain about it.
Okay.
Not acquainted with the idea of asking them.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So that's interesting. So look at Deuteronomy chapter 4. Glenn's question was, we read a lot about the Israelites complaining about their lack of food or lack of water. You don't read a whole lot of them praying or asking God, which I think would be more of the natural inclination. It's more of just a complaint that's brought to Moses. So look at chapter 4 and verse 7. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason that we may call upon Him? Doesn't that kind of speak to your idea? So Moses is saying, look, God is right here. You know, he's not distant. He's not remote. We have a tabernacle that, you know, His presence is, He's right there, right? And,
Several times you can provide and do whatever they need.
yeah. So there may be a little bit of this, the Israelites need to learn how to have a relationship with God, right? And so some things like this that Moses would say would help them understand, look, you know, you can just call on the Lord. He's near. And so, yeah, maybe there is a little bit of that. It's almost like when our children are young and they just demand all the time, you know, give me this, give me that. And we tell them, please and thank you are magic words, right? We train our young children to do that. And I think the Israelites had oftentimes acted like young children did. And they needed to grow and learn and mature. Good question. Something I hadn't thought about. That's just my off-the-cuff answer, Glenn. All right. I want you to stay here in Deuteronomy 4. The first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy, Moses surveys the nation's history from the Exodus up until the point where they are. And I know that chapters 1 through 4 were our reading assignment for the class today, but I'm going to skip over that. Or at least I'm going to skip over the first 3 chapters because so much of it is review of things that we have already talked about just in recent classes, okay? So I wanted to move on from chapters 1, 2, and 3. And I do want to spend some time in chapter 4, though, because there are some things here where Moses begins to transition from reviewing the nation's history. Well, remember we left Egypt and we went to this place and we fought this battle and then we went here and y'all were complaining and then I don't think he said y'all. You think Moses said y'all? Yeah, I would. All right. Moses reviews the history. And I'm not going to do that. I just want to skip over those things. But here's the breakdown of Moses preaching. Todd, did I call on you earlier?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I couldn't remember if I did or I thought I did. Just wanted to be certain. Okay, Tim.
Just real quick in chapter 1, I think a significant part is that
Okay, good. Give me a verse there, Tim.
Verse 10 of chapter 1.
Okay, chapter 1 and verse 10. This is a good connection. Thank you for bringing that up. Chapter 1, verse 10. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and here you are today as the stars of heaven in multitude. That should remind us of what God said to Abraham when he called him to go outside the tent and look up in the heavens. Can you count the stars? And so will your descendants be. And so Tim's point was that Moses is saying that's a reminder of what God promised to Abraham, and that would be an encouragement to this nation of people. Hey, God has been weaving a story for a long time, and here you are today, a big part of that story. That's good. Corey?
Just briefly, it's unique from sitting about Moses' last hoorah speech.
Yeah.
In chapter 3, he has this conversation with God. He said, please let me go into the land. He said, the people have prevented him. He could have been bitter. He could have said, I've done all this work, and the people have prevented me. God says, the people have prevented you from getting it.
Yeah.
Yet he's going to make his last.
Yeah, and then God says, stop talking about it. We're done. Like, I've made up my mind. It's done. Yeah.
And you could probably just feel the drain in his heart for a little bit, but then he's like, okay, I've got you.
Yeah. Well, okay, and this raises an interesting thought too. So Corey was talking about Moses not being able to go into the promised land and how disappointing that would have been. Let's jump back 40 years. Put yourself in the position of that generation 20 and above who was faithless, whom God said, you're going to wander in the wilderness and you're all going to die. You're not going to see the promised land, but your children will be allowed to go in. Okay, think about this. If you're one of those parents who's a part of that generation who is consigned to die in the wilderness, but you know that your kids are going to get to go into the land, what kind of feelings would you have about that? Oh, Christine's ready. She knew what I was going to say. She's ready.
I was thinking about this when the previous slide had, 19 years and younger. So having teenagers, they pick up on your application to what the surroundings are. If you are very much like, hey guys, we are going through some tough times right now, but I know that I believe that God has what's our best interest, and what is to come is going to be great, they're going to take that. But if we constantly are, oh, this is so miserable, I don't know why we're doing this, then are they going to have that same attitude towards whatever it is that we're trying to achieve here?
Excellent.
So I think that this is very much, yes, that 19 and under group is going to eventually take over, but their attitude is such that whatever their parents were.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think even these parents who are not going to go into the land, like you would think that the better angels prevail, and they would be able to say, okay, look, I'm not going to make it, but you have a great opportunity ahead of you, and let's do everything we can to make the most out of what your future can be, right? I mean, but maybe it wasn't that way, right? Yeah, great point. Okay. Chapter 4. Oh, Kyle, go ahead.
So we talked about that idea that everyone 20 and over is going to wander and they're all going to die and not go in. Moses wasn't 20 when that wandering started, right? Like, he was an old man then, and to get to see the promised land, and there's 120. I mean, so the fact that, he was 80 when he went back to Egypt.
When he started this journey yeah.
They get there, right? And then it just struck me that
I think we call this the Moses model of retirement. Okay? So when you turn 80, you're just getting started. All right, let's do hard things for the Lord when you turn 80. All right, chapter 4, verse 1. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live, and go in and possess the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor, from the Lord your God, for the Lord your God has destroyed from among you all the men who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land in which you go to possess. Okay, so after the review of history, and there's one instance of history that's mentioned there, but after the chapter 1, 2, and 3 historical review, then in chapter 4, Moses gets into, all right, now what is it that you need right now? And what are the things he tells them? Follow the commands of God. Don't add to the words that I'm giving you. Don't take away from the words that I'm giving you. Be sure to obey God. Okay, you're seeing those themes introduced right at the very beginning of this new part of the speech. Okay? Chapter 4, verse 6. Therefore be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. You remember when, there's been more than one occasion, actually, but you remember the times thus far when God was ready to strike everybody in the nation, and he said to Moses, I'll just start over with you, right? I'll build a whole new nation from you. And Moses would intercede for the nation. Don't do this, because if you wipe out this whole nation of people that you rescued from Egypt, what are the other nations of the world going to say about it? You remember that? But now look at the contrast. Now look at what Moses says other nations will say. Verse 6, this great nation is a wise and understanding people. If you will follow the Lord and follow his ways, that's what other nations will say about you. That just struck me. That they could be described in this way, whereas before they would have been, oh yeah, that's that nation that Jehovah rescued from Egypt and then he killed all of them because they were faithless. You don't have to be described that way. You can be described as a wise people, as a people who have understanding. We read verse 7 back when Glenn made his comment about complaining versus asking. Look at verse 8. What great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you today? Only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord your God in Horeb, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, that they may teach their children. He goes back to Mount Sinai and reminds them of what happened there. Then in verse 14, the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might observe them in the land which you cross over to possess. Take heed to yourself, he says in verse 9. Be mindful. All these things that God has said, all these words that God has given to you, these things will make you a great nation if you will do, and I don't mean great in terms of the way he said it to Abraham in terms of number, but great in terms of quality and virtue, okay? You will be a great people if you follow the Lord's ways. Verses 15 through 31, he gives a warning about idolatry. He gives a warning that other nations are going to have an influence on you, and if you're not mindful of all the things that God is saying to you, these other nations and their religious practices will influence and have an effect on you. Don't let that happen. And he contrasts that discussion of idolatry, beginning in verse 32 through 40, when he talks about the God of the Israelites. Verse 32, "For ask now concerning the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other, whether any great thing like this has happened or anything has been heard. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and live?" Again, going back to Sinai and what God did there. "Or did God," verse 34, "ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord himself is God, that there is no other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might instruct you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and he brought you out of Egypt with his presence, with his mighty power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance, as it is this day. Therefore know this day and consider it in your heart, that the Lord himself is God in heaven above and on earth beneath, and there is no other. You shall therefore keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time." What other group of people on the earth has been so fortunate and privileged to see the things that you have seen? Don't let that go to waste. God chose you. You're a special people to him. Look at all the things that he has done to show you that he is not like the gods of the Egyptians or the gods of the Canaanites. All right. What do you see in those verses? What do you want to add?
It's a lesson for us.
How so?
He's chosen us. I mean, we've seen what God's done in our lives, saved us from sin. Do not give up on it. Don't follow the gods of money or whatever. I mean, he's going to lead us in the promised land. So we study this for a reason. You know, not just to memorize books, but I think there's application to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right, what else? Joe?
Or the case made that specifically the Old Testament elevating the nation of Israel is like kind of self-serving with the Israelites. So of course they might produce some document that says they're chosen by God. But if that's the case, then I think the difficulty of the Israelites, the punishments that they experience, and the challenges that they experience really validate how accurate the Old Testament is, because if it was by them for their own sake, then all these stories that Moses is talking about, all the difficulties they went through, it doesn't make much sense if they were doing it to make themselves look good or to pump themselves up, so to speak.
Yeah, okay, so let's go to chapter 9. All right, so Moses specifically addresses this, okay? So Joe's comment was about, let me make sure I frame it properly. Critics of the Bible would say, oh, look at this Israelite nation. Oh, we're so special, and we're different from everybody else. We're better than everybody else. Okay? And Joe's point was, okay, but to be a specially chosen people by God, they sure did have a really hard time in life. Right? God didn't make things easy for them. Look at chapter 9, verse 3. Understand today that the Lord your God is he who goes over before you as a consuming fire. He will destroy them, he's talking about the Canaanites, and bring them down before you, so you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly as the Lord has said to you. Now, Joe, look at verse 4, to your point. Do not think in your heart, after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God drives them out from before you, that he may fulfill his word which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand, verse 6, that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. Okay? So don't get the impression that God chose you and made you his special people because there's actually something special about you intrinsically over other nations. There's not. But, God does have this purpose that he is fulfilling, and you have a role right now in bringing punishment on these wicked nations, right? But Israel is going to prove that they're just human beings just like everybody else, and they're fallible, and they make a lot of mistakes too. Yeah. Good. Anything else? Oh.
It's not like the Israelites are some sort of holy crusaders getting rid of the wicked people. They're just people who are following God. They might not do it perfectly, they're just doing God's duty. And it's that way, just trying to think, it's not like they're special. They're just people.
They are.
Honestly, the special thing is how stiff-necked they are.
Yeah, they are instruments that God is using to bring judgment on these Canaanite nations for their wickedness, right? Back in Genesis 15, Abraham was told that this was going to happen after several centuries. Okay, when I get up to preach this morning, I'm going to take my cue from Moses in this picture. I'm going to preach like this. All right? I don't know if y'all knew, that's the official preacher pose. I haven't brought that out yet, though. In 8 years I've been here, I've never used that here. But just watch out. I'll do it this morning. I got my shoes on. All right. Don't forget to obey the Lord. Follow the ways that God has given you. He begins on this really in the second speech, which is going to begin in chapter 5. But look at chapter 4 and verse 44. We'll close with chapter 4 this morning. This is the law which Moses set before the children of Israel. These are the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments which Moses spoke to the children of Israel after they came out of Egypt on this side of the Jordan. What does that mean? On this side of the Jordan. Where are they? Yeah, they're on the east side still. They haven't, the Jordan River is the defining eastern boundary, okay? And they're on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and the land is before them. And Moses is preaching to them in the plains of Moab, there on the east side of the Jordan. So when you read and it says on this side of the Jordan, okay, well that's what it means at the present time. All right, chapter 4, and a little bit more review of some of their history and things that God has done. Verse 46 and 47 talks about Sihon and Og, two Amorite kings who were on this side of the Jordan. Again, verse 47, they're on the east side. Then when you come into chapter 5, which we're not studying this, but I'm just setting it up So we'll look into this on Wednesday beginning. Moses is going to review the 10 Commandments in chapter 5. He's going to remind them of the 10 Commandments that were given back at Sinai. Okay? And he'll have a lot of things to say in this second speech. The second speech really goes from chapter 5 to chapter 26. Okay? This was one of Joe's speeches. Okay? This is one of Joe's sermons. Ben's sermon was chapters 1 through 4. Joe's sermon's 5 to 26. Okay? Okay, I know it's not true. I know that. I know some of y'all are thinking, you've got some pretty long sermons too, Ben. You're right. You're right. All right. I want to stop right there. I don't want us to get into chapter 5 until Wednesday. So you guys got anything you want to add before we close up shop for the morning?
Can I make one more comment?
Yes, and then Joe.
I don't know what they were thinking in particular, but I can't help but think they thought God might change his mind. You're not getting into this land. Moses has interceded for him, multiple times. And it's just my opinion, but I think some of those people thought, well, maybe God will change his mind one more time. We're talking about the next generation's attitude.
Okay, during the... okay.
During the wilderness.
Yeah.
Just giving up or whatever, or they're wandering, well, maybe God will change his mind. So I just thought I'd throw that in there too. I can't help but think some of them might actually think that.
Okay. Joe?
Even though later on they fell away, in large part, this generation seemed to have taken his speech to heart. And because
At least initially, yes. Yeah, that's right. Okay, very good.